folks, my name is Michael, and here at the Aurora Library System I run a couple groups. I run the True Crime Book Club, the Horror Corner Book Club, and a discussion group called Cults, Conspiracies, and Secret Societies. And this here today is the mini-con version of that. And I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange and unusual journey. So if you like creepy and horrifyingly true tales, right, based here in Colorado, then stay tuned. But first, roll that beautiful warning content. Our first true tale takes us to Silver Plume, Colorado, in the years 1987 and 1988, where two mysterious disappearances have very odd and eerie similarities. Tom Young was a man who ran a bookstore in the small mountain town and was well liked by his fellow citizens. When he disappeared in September of 1987, people thought he was on the vacation to Europe he had talked about, and had forgotten to tell them goodbye. Once weeks turned into months, though, they began to worry. His disappearance became a topic of speculation amongst the locals, unsure whether foul play may have occurred or whether Tom just decided not to come back. The bookshop stood shuttered and still, until Keith Reinhard came to town. Keith was a writer by trade, and currently going through an admitted midlife crisis, which led him to yearning for an adventure with a peaceful home base to return to, somewhere he could stay for at least a few months. The Rocky Mountains offered just what he was looking for. It was after Keith moved to town and opened his antique store that he learned about Tom, and that his new antique store was formerly Tom's bookstore. What better material was there for a book than a good mystery? It sparked the fire of inspiration. Keith became enthralled with the mystery of what happened to Tom. He would walk around town asking anyone about what kind of man Tom was. Where did Tom like to go? What did Tom do in his off time? Armed with this knowledge, Keith began writing a fictional novel based loosely off Tom's life. Some said the attention Keith gave this new project was verging on an unhealthy, turning into an overpowering obsession. Eventually, word came that the skeletal remains of Tom and his beloved dog Gus were discovered in the surrounding mountains. This devastated the people who had known Tom, but it's not clear what Keith's reaction was. Yet, 1 week later, Keith wanted to go into the mountains for an adventure himself. Keith went around town telling everyone he was going on a hike on the nearby mountain trail, and would be starting out well into the afternoon. This seemed odd to most, because who goes to climb a mountain in the afternoon with evening looming? Night comes so much faster in the mountains. Still off he went, and Keith was not been seen since. He became like Tom once was, just another Silver Plume Mystery. It was as if he just vanished, and the mystery just continued to grow over the years. Many theories have been offered. That it was just a tragic coincidence, that there was a serial killer in the mountains, or possibly the two men unwittingly got caught of a secret, illegal, toxic waste dumping that was rumored to be occurring. The number of theories is only surpassed by the number of months and years that have come and gone without any answers. Many people believe that the last sentence of Keith's last unfinished novel contains everything we need to know about what happened. Quote, Guy Gibson changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt. He understood it all now. In his motivations, Guy closed the door and then walked off towards the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above. Our second true tale will take us from 1987 to 1931 to the small town of Pleasant Hill, Colorado, and Kiowa County. On that day, school children scurried into their small schoolhouse with glee in their eyes. What they didn't know is that a storm was coming to their small town. Their teachers stood outside looking at the clouds with worry in their eyes. It wasn't long before the sudden and rapid accumulation of snow had the teachers discussing early dismissal. They came to the decision to send the children home, knowing the schoolhouse was not equipped to safely keep the kids overnight. They were notified. The drivers and the two vehicles designated to take the two groups home pulled up outside. Little did they know there was more that set these two apart than their appearance and the directions they would take. One would lead to the most horrifying ride home any would experience. Carl Miller had converted his 1929 Chevy truck, used to haul hay in the summer, to a semi-functional makeshift school bus to transport the kids in his off-season, placing two benches in the back, one along each side for 20 children to share. It was a tight ride. Imagine the space behind the driver's seat in a minivan, and you'll have some idea of the space we worked with. And that they all crammed into. As the vehicle drove down the road, it became obvious that they were going to have a rough ride home. The snow came down hard and fast, driven by 40-mile-per-hour winds. The conditions created a total whiteout. Carl took what he thought was a shortcut, which took them off the normal route. It didn't take them long for them to get stuck, with the engine dying. They were only a mile from the schoolhouse, though in a blizzard it might as well have been 10. With the makeshift bus not moving and the heat out, Carl turned to face the still oblivious children. He must have realized their dire circumstances, seeing snow coming into the broken back windows, the cardboard used to seal them dangling loose, feeling the temperature inside begin to drop dramatically. Carl told the children in order to stay warm, they needed to move. The children began to dance, jump, play, and sing, a macabre little performance to stay warm and ward off the cold. However, this could not last as the children became tired and weak. One by one, they started to lay down. Moving around became yelling out each other's names as a last-ditch effort not to fall into a delirium. With no food or water and the weather unrelenting, the storm took its first victim. Night began to fall. The group decided to huddle together in a pile and try to survive the hours to come. Unfortunately, during the night, hypothermia started to set in, and due to its effects, some of the children took off much-needed jackets and sweaters. By the morning, no one had come to help, and one more child had passed. Carl knew they couldn't wait any longer for help, and decided to leave the children alone in order to find that help. He promised the children he'd be back, and they would have pancakes for breakfast. It was about this time that some parents, after hitching up some horses, reached the schoolhouse. What they found must have sent shivers down their spine. An empty room, a partly caved-in roof, snow drifting in, and no sign of the children. These parents knew they had to go back out into the elements and search the surrounding area for their kids. Luckily, at this time, the storm began to let up, and the blue vehicle would become visible to searchers. It was spotted, and at 5 p.m. the door to the bus was pried open. One of the men, upon entering, only more remarked, "Oh, what a sight." What they beheld was a pile of children half frozen after being in these conditions for now 33 hours. They were all transported to a nearby farm and then rushed to the hospital. In all, 5 children had passed. Carl Miller's body was found 3 miles from the makeshift bus. His hands and gloves ripped and torn. Due to the whiteout conditions, Carl couldn't see where he was going, so he grabbed a hold of the only thing he could find, a barbed wire fence. He followed it, holding tight for miles, till he too froze to death. Now, this incident caught the attention of the nation, and the kids were thrown in the limelight, and some of them used as pawn figures for public. And even though this was a tragic and horrible incident, it did, however, pass regulations and laws, making buses to this day safer than they were, including painting them bright colors, like yellow, having them equipped with emergency lights and two-way radios, and making it mandatory that most schoolhouses have phones in them. Have you ever placed an item down on a table, only to come back later to find that it has moved, or even completely disappeared, and you just chalk it up for forgetfulness that you must have done it yourself? Well, this second story might have you thinking twice about that. For the approval of the Midnight Society, I call this next tale the Spiderman of Denver. Our third tale is commonly known as the Spiderman of Denver, though friendly he is not. October 17th, 1941 was a normal, quiet day for the Denver neighborhood of what is now West Highland. That would change when a concerned neighbor called the police to check on his 73-year-old friend, Philip Peters. Police arrived at the home and discovered the senior citizen dead from apparent blunt force trauma. Oddly enough, all doors and windows were locked from the inside. With no leads or cause for the crime, the case went cold quickly. Sadly, while all this was happening, Philip Peters' wife had been in the hospital recuperating. She was now heading home to an empty house, or so she thought. Being in her golden years, Mrs. Peters hired a housekeeper to help her around the home. It started to become quite clear to the two women that things were not normal. Each would comment to the other about hearing noises in the home, like whispers around the corners with no one there, or food going missing, stuff being moved, and strange smells. It became enough for the hired help to announce that the house was haunted, and she abruptly left. Mrs. Peters was now alone in the house, and realized she couldn't stay. No doubt with a heavy heart, she left the house she and her husband had called home. The house was left empty. It became the boogie house of the neighborhood, with stories of it being haunted and cursed. Kids doubtless dared each other to knock on the door and run, even to venture inside. This went on for months. To some, the house was just an infamous house due to the events. To others, it was still a danger and waiting. Police would continue to get calls, from reports of lights turning on and off to figures being seen in the windows. Police would chalk it up to local pranksters, but they continued to make random checks on the house. What they found was the same the day Philip Peters was found dead. Doors and windows locked, and no one to be seen. That was until July 30th, 1942. On another routine check of the house, officers heard a lock click noise from the second floor. Police ran as fast as they could up the stairs just in time to see legs hanging down from a small trap door that led to a crawl space in the attic. They had caught Theodore Coney, who under police custody confessed to the murder of Philip Peters. Being homeless and without means, Theodore apparently came to the house of Mr. and Mrs. Peters for a handout. That's when he noticed a hidden crawl space through a small cubby hole in a closet. He decided to live in a small attic, coming down at night for food. That lasted for 5 weeks, till Mr. Phillips found Theodore in front of the fridge eating food. Theodore would say he didn't know what to do, and the attack was more of a reflex. In total, he stayed up there 10.5 months. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, dying in 1967. And there you have it, 3 horrifyingly true tales of Colorado legend. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. And remember to watch your surroundings, trust your instincts, and take care of each other. And if this kind of stuff interests you, stay tuned afterwards while I roll my book club information. Until next time, everyone,